Yes. With real money. Let's hope.
Yeah. All right.
He would look great at Fenway, Mika, like you always say.
Well, okay. 1 week after the 2024 election, Democrats continue to assess the party's path forward. Longtime Democratic strategist James Carville addressed what he called Democrats' fascination with identity politics. And here's what he told Ari Melber in an interview yesterday on MSNBC's The Beat.
With reference to exotic positions, which I call identity politics, if you read the article in the New York Times, I said I give Harris credit. She does not bring this up. But this stuff is like smoke on your clothes of a fireplace. You can't wash it off. And the other side is, well, it's true. They never said it. You know how many millions of dollars that the Republicans ran on anti-identity politics positions that people had taken in the Democratic Party in 2019 and 2020? The answer is a lot. Because you see, in politics, the other side gets to play. And you've got to understand that. And it's going to take another 4 years before we wash the stench of this off of our clothes. Other very relevant, Alameda County, California, just so if you don't know, that's Oakland and Berkeley. Okay, that's East Bay, recalled a pro-identity politics prosecutor by 30 points. So it was kind of on the ballot in Alameda County. But, of course, this was a stupid diversion for people to follow, for people to get into. The problem is I clearly said that Harris didn't embrace this, but because it was embraced, they brought it up. And they ran on it. And they ran on it with senators. Ask Senators Manchin, Casey, Brown, and Tester if they think that identity politics in the early part of this decade had an effect on their vote in this election. I can tell you what they're going to say. Yeah, it did. We can all agree that the fascination with identity politics on the part of some people in the Democratic Party was a giant mistake.
Well, and you know, there will be some commentators out there and some comedians that say, oh, they didn't talk about it during the campaign. No, of course not. They governed that way over the past 8 years. They talked about it over the past 8 years. And as James said, it was like smoke in a jacket or in clothes that you couldn't get it out. It takes a while to get it out. So they certainly ran $30 million of ads on social issues that tore away at it. And, you know, Willie, I'm so glad James in that clip brought up California, because while California easily went for Kamala Harris, you had a recall of DAs, I think, in San Francisco, I believe in Los Angeles. You had the mayor of San Francisco defeated. And so much of it had to do what you and I have been talking about for like 4 years. And that is this very permissive approach towards crime. It's a very permissive approach towards homelessness that is not safe, that is not humane for those who are homeless living in tents in public places. This very permissive approach towards letting people go into stores, smashing and grabbing up to $1,000 in merchandise and not being charged with a felony. So California voters, and one of the most liberal states in America, they reacted against this sort of post-2000 viewpoint on crime as well. And it's just not working anywhere.
Yeah, and we saw it in New York City, too. I mean, you could talk about almost every major city where voters didn't turn out the way the Harris campaign fully expected them to and certainly hoped they would. You can talk about Detroit, you talk about Philadelphia, but in a place like New York, the issue of bail reform, the revolving door of criminals getting arrested and being back on the street the next day, all of that stuff went to a feeling. And you mentioned San Francisco. It's not because the people who may have drifted from the Democratic Party and supported Donald Trump, it's not that they're MAGA extremists. It's that they felt that common sense in some ways had been lost, that it doesn't make any sense to allow someone to steal up to $850 or $950 worth of merchandise to keep it a misdemeanor and let that person not serve jail time. What is that? Normal, sensible people fairly asked and voted on this time around. Jonathan Martin, let's get to your latest piece in Politico. It's titled People, Not Groups, How Democrats Can Retool Their Message. In this piece, Jonathan writes, Democrats now have a mandate for change, and not just on tactics or points of emphasis. The breadth of their defeat and the number of voters who abandoned them present the party an opening to rethink their orientation around affinity group politics. The question is whether they'll be emboldened or cower when one of the groups, as identity-based organizations are invariably called, speaks up, but the reward is alluring. Whoever can retain the party's traditional commitments to the most vulnerable and appeal to those voters who just rejected Harris will emerge as the strongest 2028 nominee and perhaps the next president. And if Democrats don't change their appeals, they'll face the same cultural barriers with vast swaths of the country they have in every recent election. First, they must recognize that they unwittingly ceded the ground for Trump's revival. Their leftward acceleration under his presidency handed him the fodder he needed to portray the opposition as radical. And Jonathan, we hear all the time that it's the things you have to say and support to win a primary as a Democrat running for president come back to haunt you in a general election, just as 2019 Kamala Harris.
Exactly. Willie, that's exactly right. That spot that got so much play thanks to the Trump campaign was her speaking in 2019, because that was a period where the left was in full flower, the backlash that Trump was on. And the assumption among most Democrats was the path to getting back to power was trying to appear the most pure and race to the left in a primary. The one person, by the way, who didn't adopt that tactic was Joe Biden. He obviously won the primary and won the general, but Kamala Harris paid a price, not at the time, although she lost the primary, but guys, she paid a price 5 years later when that ad got played so many times. And this is, to me, the central question now with Trump back in office. Will Democrats learn from their mistakes from the last time he was president and not respond by this race to the left on every identity issue to please various groups and their coalitions, Will they resist that? Will they take the Harris path in 19 or the Biden path in 19? That, to me, is the most salient question. And what's been encouraging, I think, so far in my column today, the response that I've gotten across the board from a lot of Democrats is they just don't want to keep towing the line. They know that the identity politics and the language especially is alienating to large swaths of the country. And I think they're ready for some level of reform.
I also read that answer came in response to an ACLU questionnaire, and you know, a lot of Democrats asking, why ask a question like that on a questionnaire? You're just setting somebody up in the future. But Jay Mart, just for people, people may not remember just how crazy things got in the Democratic Party in 19 and 20. Just how far left everybody got. I remember, you know, I'd become an independent. Mika said, you need to be a Democrat. You need to be a Democrat. And I said, I kind of like this independent thing. And watch the first presidential debate. And everybody up on that stage, except for, I think, Joe Biden, said they supported a return to busing. And I'm like, that was unpopular in 1974. And they darted so far left in 19 and 20 that you're right. They snagged a commercial from 19 during that time when Democrats thought, I got to go on far left to win. They snagged that and other things from 2019 and applied it to 2024. And America has gotten more conservative over the past 5 years because crime, because of the southern border, because of inflation. You go through the list. And so it's interesting that you say that Democrats are responding positively to this and saying, you're exactly right. We need to find a new way forward. It kind of reminds me of Bill Clinton, you know, in 88 through 92. It was sort of the new way for the new Democrats.
Joe, here's what's so clarifying about this moment is you can't say that this was a bunch of racist, driving a pickup truck that done this. Look, I talked to Grace Meng, who represents one of the most diverse districts in America. It's Queens. All right. There's not an active Klan presence in Flushing today. OK. And a lot of her district voted for her and voted for Donald Trump. These are first generation Asian and Hispanic immigrants. OK. You say to them something like community communities of color, or, you know, we're going to uplift or center this or that. They don't know what the hell you're talking about. The party is using the language, as Carville often says, of like the Amherst faculty lounge. And they're not speaking like human beings. And what Grace Meng told me, she said, we got to use everyday American language that my grandmother can understand. And that's a really important point. And it doesn't take much. It's not a policy change, but it's an important, I think, reform that's got to be made.
All right, so let's bring in political columnist for New York Magazine, Ed Kilgore. Ed's latest piece is entitled Democrats Were Crushed in 2004, too. Then everything changed. And you write in part this, Ed, if I may. We are not in an era characterized by much interest in political history, unless there's a podcast on it that I've missed. But you don't actually have to go back that far to find a moment when Democrats were similarly afflicted. In some ways, election night 2004 was even more painful for partisans of presidential nominee John Kerry, thanks to faulty early exit polling showing him winning. As we now know, the sense of Republican strength and Democratic weakness that was so pervasive on election night 2004 was ephemeral. Democrats flipped both congressional chambers in 2006. And then, in the crucible of a highly competitive nomination contest, Democrats found the leader they needed in a young senator named Barack Obama. None of this, of course, is to say Democrats can count on anything like their post-2004 comeback in the days ahead. But there are plenty of things that could go wrong in a second Trump administration. So while Democrats really should conduct a thorough self-examination of what went wrong since 2020, despair is premature and probably unwarranted.
And the similarities between what happened in 24 and what happened in 04, as you laid out in the piece, were pretty remarkable.
Striking.
Willie and I always sort of joked about the fact that we've never seen Manhattan so depressed as the day after George W. Bush was reelected. It may actually have been worse than the day after Donald Trump, as you said. But there were so many parallels in the election results, how they turned out, but also in the overconfidence of Republicans. Karl Rove, a guy who knows a thing or two about politics, looked at the 2000 election, Republicans overperforming in 2002, Republicans overperforming in 2004, and spoke confidently about a permanent Republican majority. 2 years later, Nancy Pelosi was Speaker of the House. 4 years later, Barack Obama won in a massive landslide.
Well, that's all correct. Anytime you hear people talking about permanent majorities or political realignment or anything so fundamental, and you're hearing a lot of talk from the MAGA camp right now along those lines, that things will never be the same. Democratic core constituencies are abandoning the party left and right. Trump's making huge gains in New York and California, which he did make some gains, but over-interpreting the results in either direction is almost always a mistake. The ancient Greeks called it hubris, and I think there's a lot of that going on in Trump circles right now. And, you know, there's always a calculation when you win an election. How much political capital do you expend on doing the things you want to do, like mass deportation that might backfire economically and politically, or how much do you really continue to pay attention to the electorate? One